What's that sound? It's for amusement only, the EM and Bingo Pinball Podcast. Welcome back to For Amusement Only. This is Nick Baldridge. As usual, here recently, a very tired Nick Baldridge. I've had a lot of stuff going on at work, but that's not fun stuff. That's not pinball. So let's talk about some pinball. At York, I picked up a game for Ryan Clater. It's a 1940 Chicago coin fox hunt, and I've been working on that pretty much non-stop since I got back from New York. The first order of business was some restoration type stuff. A lot of the rubber from some time ago. I don't know if it's original, but it's really old. Whatever that rubber was had bonded to the playfield, and I had to get that off of the playfield in order to clean it. Unfortunately, this rubber had also bonded to most of the plastic surfaces as well. There are no playfield plastics on this game, but there are a ton of passive bumpers. And unfortunately, every bumper skirt and every bumper body was just coated in this goo. And there was stuff on metal springs and just all over the place. So the way I attempted to remove that, I went through a few different approaches. And the whole thing is, I knew that the art underneath... Well, I hoped that the art underneath was still intact. This old rubber bonds in a different way than newer rubber that dry rots. It doesn't just stick to the surface. It's like it bonds to it. It really does something kind of odd. It melts into a puddle and reforms. So to get it off, you can't just take a fingernail and scrape it off, especially because these puddles that I'm talking about were so thick. They were very deep, I guess, and you couldn't really get a fingernail underneath of it to lift it, and the surface area was so large that your chances of actually damaging the artwork were pretty great if you tried to do that. So instead what I did is took an X-Acto knife, a fresh X-Acto knife, not a scraper, but just a handheld X-Acto knife, and slowly worked back and forth and scraped away the rubber one tiny fraction of a piece at a time, and that worked really well. Emboldened by that, I took a look at the bumper skirts and the bumpers themselves, and these bumper bodies are kind of unique for a game that's this old. Again, this is 1940. Most games that old, the plastic that they used isn't like the plastics that they started using in the 1960s. It's not quite the same. So what happens is over time it'll shrink and settle and warp in these odd ways. And so most older games, like much older games that you pick up, you'll have maybe all the bumpers are there, but they're contorted and odd. Well, luckily, every single bumper on this was flat out perfect, except for the fact that it was covered in all this junk. So, normal cleaning methods weren't working, so I ended up trying the X-Acto thing again. And again, I was just emboldened by what had happened with the playfield surface. And at the end of the day, or several days in a row worth of work, I managed to remove all that junk from the bumper bodies, the bumper skirts, and the playfield, and the original art was intact, and the bumper bodies and skirts could be reused, and it looks great. So that was the hardest part of the cosmetics. Of course, I took out and tumbled and polished and did all that stuff for all the metal, and replaced springs and did those kind of things. So I don't know if I've talked about this before, but here's a little minor tech tip. On a game that old, a lot of the action of the ball comes from actually the side springs. Later on, most of the manufacturers switched to rubber on wood rails that ran on the left and right side of the playfield surface. But earlier games used springs, kind of like bingos, that surround the entire playfield, playing surface. So there would be blocked off sections where extra artwork would be, or extra lamps, or whatever the case was. But as the ball is careening down the playfield, you can actually nudge it skillfully off of the side springs. And if you're playing on springs which are 50, 60 years old and have been extended for that period of time, they've lost some of their sproing. And replacing those is a pretty cheap way to really liven up an older game like that. So, did that. Polished all the plastic and all the typical stuff, and it really looks great. So that's pretty exciting. Now, let's talk about lamp sockets, because lamp sockets for older games, say most things that are pre-war. I don't know exactly when the changeover happened. That's what I'm trying to think about here. But most things that are pre-war have screw base lamp sockets. And I've worked on a few games with the screw base lamp sockets before, but this was the first one where every single socket... let me back up. The screw-based lamp sockets come in two different varieties. There's kind of an encapsulated one, or an enclosed one, where it functions like the screw-base socket for a typical incandescent light bulb that you might have in a floor lamp or whatever. So those are typically just fine. Occasionally they might get a little mashed or whatever, and you can bend them back into shape, and they're fine. The second type, and this is far more annoying, is there's a screw-base type that is essentially just a spring. And you screw the screw base into the spring, and the spring is electrified as well as the base, and so it conducts electricity just like any other socket. It's just kind of funky. Well, every single one of those sockets, they must have used some kind of dielectric grease or something at some point in the past, and it had hardened into super glue. I mean, that stuff was tough. The sockets were all heavily corroded, and breaking the bulbs free meant actually breaking the glass envelope and removing it. So gloves were a must, because once you remove those, you're left with a lot of sharp edges. Even though all the glass is gone, there's a lot of filler junk inside a bulb, and of course the edge of the socket itself, or the base, is sharp. So eventually unscrewed all of those somehow, and I set about to cleaning those. Amazingly, I was shocked by this, but I was able to clean up all of those sockets just with the standard socket cleaner pencil tip thing that Steve Young sells at Pinball Resource, and they shine like new. I've tested each of the sockets with a 9-volt battery, and you just put the battery across the lugs and with the lamp in there and see if it lights. And you can also test with a meter. So I ran out of bulbs at one point. Only some of the bulbs were actually good, which is not a shock. So rather than unscrew and then rescrew these bulbs over and over and over again, what I thought I'd do is just test with the meter, and sure enough, all of the sockets conduct 9 volts, so I think it'll be just fine for 6 volts. So flash forward a little, and I did some light cabinet restoration as well. Sanded all the wood for the rails. Was shipped a set of legs for the game that are not necessarily correct for the game, although it's unclear what is correct for that game. The pictures on the IPDB are not certain, and they seem to indicate that it takes a bingo style cut leg and probably a bingo style height leg, which is what ended up going on this game. Well, there were 4 different legs, and 3 of them are exactly the same. One of them is a different type. So I wanted to go ahead and sand all those and stain all of the wood trim for the back box, the side rails, and the lockdown bar, as well as the legs, and coat everything with a light poly. And it's beautiful. So it looks great, and it feels great underhand, and that's wonderful. I also used a automatic buffer on the cab itself, and this is my first go around with one of those, and I will tell you that I was not a firm believer, especially as it's thrown around a lot of the cleaning goo that I use. But when I was finished, man, that cabinet is bright and shiny and looks wonderful. I waxed it by hand, but the initial cleaning just did such a great job. I think I'll try using that again in the future for the next cab that I do. Just really saves a lot of time on scrubbing, and is gentle on the paint as well. So that's pretty cool. Then it came time to really refurb the mechanics. So I went through every bit of the game, refurbed every stepper, double-checked every relay, took a look at every switch, the usual. Fixed up things like the coin slide, which somebody had just jammed more and more grease into over the years until it stopped moving. And same with the lifter. I'm shocked that somebody hadn't broken that lifter assembly trying to make it work, because it was so gummed up, nothing would move it. I mean, you could push on the lifter rod and nothing would happen. So extremely lucky that none of that was bent, and everything cleaned up, and it works like new. It's great. So now I'm on to electrical, and here I've run into a bit of a problem. Now, normally I don't do kind of the cosmetics, heavy-duty cosmetics, until after I've gotten things mechanically running and electrically running. But in this case, I went ahead and did that, as time is a factor. So now that I've got that done, the problem that I have is that there's no schematic for the game. So I know essentially what it needs to do. There needs to be a relay that trips and tilts the game, for example. There needs to be a relay which trips and chooses a selection, I assume. There needs to be a relay that trips and resets the game. Again, an assumption. So there's no motor in the game, which makes it interesting. That means that the reset has to happen all at the same time, and all as part of pushing in the coin slide. The other thing that has to happen is the electrolock needs to turn on, which will enable coil power as well as lamp power. So, here's where I'm at. There's a bank of 3 trip relays which are attached to the end of the baffle. When you push in the coin slide, at the end there's this little bracket that extends down, and it pushes all 3 trip relay levers back into the reset position. And so then they can trip and have whatever impact on the game that they're going to have. One of those is tripping immediately, and I believe it's the tilt. So I manually misadjusted one of the slam tilt switches, and it causes that to trip immediately. Now, if that tilt trip doesn't trip immediately, then the electrolock will not latch. The electrolock is not turning on the playfield or backbox lights, nor is it enabling any other coils in the game to function except for replay reset. So this game has a knockoff button, and you push this button and it'll remove one credit at a time. It doesn't have a full replay reset that's motorized, like, for example, a bingo. It's an earlier game that you could be paid out on if the bar owner so chose. It doesn't automatically pay out. So that works, and that's great. And it stops at 0. Wonderful. Unfortunately, there's no lit indication of how many replays that you have, and certainly nothing else lights up either. When that relay is latched, that one that I'm assuming is tilt, and the electrolock is on at the same time, which it's not supposed to be, at least according to the behavior that I'm witnessing, then the lights on the playfield are active. But only very, very briefly. So I'm not sure what the next step is, but I'm just beginning kind of this phase of troubleshooting, and we'll see what happens from here. Once I have coil power active, then I think I will be able to troubleshoot, the actual gameplay and make sure that the game does, in fact, choose a horse and advance horses and all that good stuff. Right now, if I hit a bumper, absolutely nothing happens. The game is essentially dead. None of the switches are stuck closed, which, that would be something to look for if nothing is functioning. Something is stuck on. Nothing is stuck on. None of the coils are, buzzing or doing anything except for the electrolock. So, it's really kind of a game of, guess which thing to address next, because it has to be attached to this coin slide somewhere, but it doesn't seem, from just logical poking and prodding at this thing and a basic understanding of how it should work, that, my lamps should be off, but they are. On top of that, there's no tilt lamp which is active, so I'm not even certain that relay is a tilt relay. It could be a reset relay, and maybe it thinks it's done its job, and so reset time is over. There are only 2 switch pairs on that relay, which I would find incredibly strange if it is handling all of the reset logic. There are very few relays outside of those 3, which could be considered to have anything to do with anything at all. There are 2 relays in the head, and there's an additional, I think, 5 or 6 momentary relays under the playfield. There's also a relay for free play, which is attached to the coin slide, and it just pulls the dog, pushes the dog up into the coin slide so that it can move freely. That, even if replays are on the unit, the credit unit, is not activating. So there's some kind of power problem, and it must be coming from the common. But power is getting to the playfield, and it is able to hold the electrolock on. So I'm just going through and measuring voltages and seeing where the drop is. The wiring for this game is quite strange. There are several commons, like tie points, which they've made, and the tie points are just held together with a screw and a single blob of solder, holding, half a dozen wires together. It's very strange, but it should function. And everything is relatively clean. The wire is not dry rotted. It is old. I mean, it's 1940. It's not new. So it needs a little attention, but it's getting there. So, what else is going on? Boy, I guess it's been about a month since I did one of these. I was able to pick up a card-themed bingo playfield, and I've got that here along with the plastic set, and I'm going to, clean that up and get it ready and wire it into the multi. And as part of that, what I'm going to do is program in all 4 of the card-themed bingo games. That's Twin Joker, Yukon, and 2 others, which I don't recall off the top of my head. Yukon is the only one, if I recall correctly, that allows you to play for replays. The others are all novelty games, like Twin Joker. So you're just playing for competitive fun instead of for, the thrill of winning hundreds of replays. So I'll be working to get that done. The other thing I'd like to do is finish wiring Robo Frenzy. I'm sitting here staring at this back door with all the units attached to it, and there's no wiring attached to it whatsoever. I'd gone through previously and stripped all the units of all of the wire that was attached to them. So they're ready to be wired for me to build the harnesses, but I just need to do it. And unfortunately, I haven't had the time. But soon. So, speaking of other things which are taking my attention, I helped my friend Steve Smith today move a beautiful Chicago coin Kilroy. That was one of the nicest original condition games that I've seen. And it's surprising on that particular title. They made 100 billion of that game. They made an awful lot. And most of them are just worn down to the wood. This one's playfield is in pretty good shape. All the bumpers are incredibly excellent. And the back glass is great. The only problem with it is some of the mirroring is starting to kind of pull away. And a little bit of some of the colored sections on the edges of the glass. But other than that, it is gorgeous, beautiful, and vibrant. I was shocked when I saw how nice that was. And the cabinet paint is also just fantastic. So hoping to maybe get out there and help Steve if he needs it. Or at least get in his way while he fixes it up. And then give it a play or two. Despite how many they've made, I've never seen or played one before, so I'm interested to see how it plays. It's got an interesting mechanic up on the top of the playfield, so I want to see that in action if I can. And other than that, that's been kind of my EM highlights here. I've been working on Fox Hunt like crazy, just trying to get that done here, and I'm in the home stretch, and this is really the fun part for me. I do love seeing the cosmetics, pop back into the way that they should, getting the rubber off of there and so forth. But for me, one of the most fun parts is puzzling out these electrical issues. So, and especially on a game this old where it's really just gut instinct. There's no roadmap to success. I've worked on other games which are as old and older, and I've worked on other games which are newer, but only slightly. And so some of that experience comes into play too, and just basic things like, well, I know the game's got to reset when you put in a coin. Some of these switches must be involved somehow. So just knowing that helps me narrow down where I need to look, if that makes sense. I apologize if I have been more pausey than normal, and I know I pause a lot. My phrasing is very distinct, somebody told me once, but the reason for that, I'm just flat out exhausted, and I apologize. So, let's talk about the year of Flipperless. Today's game is 1934's Chicago coin, just carrying on the theme here. Showboat. Now, Showboat might be familiar to some of you longtime listeners. I've probably talked about both the Gottlieb Wedgehead with unique flipper setup, as well as the United Bingo, the only 6 card that United made. This is a completely different animal. Being 1934, it's pre-war. It is a smaller game. It's 43 inches. And the unique feature in this game, it's an early electromechanical, and there's a center lane in which up to 6 balls in a center track. In order to advance them down this track, you can land a ball up at the top of the track, and that's worth 1,000 points. Each time you land a ball in a hole at the top, it will kick all the balls in that lane down one position, which increases the score that they're worth, and it will also ring a bell at the same time. So, land a ball in at the top of the track, your next ball, you hit that center target up at the top, the center hole there, and the game goes ding and advances the balls down. That is a pretty cool mechanic, and it's similar to some of the later Bally multi-ball setups, like on Mad World in the 1960s, where the balls have to advance down this track on the right side of the playfield. This is front and center, though, and it takes up the vast majority of the playing space in the center. On the left and right are arrayed a series of holes. Unfortunately, the only picture I could find was a blurry ad from Billboard, which I'm thankful that exists, of course. It's just unfortunate that I can't see the point values or really if there is a higher scoring pocket than the bottom gate, as they call it on the flyer, or this ad. So the bottom gate is worth 7,000 points, and that is after you advance 6 times. Really cool feature. I'd be really interested to see one of these, and of course take some pictures. If anybody has one of these or has played one of these, I'd be interested in hearing about it. The gimmick is really neat. I mean, that's quite a come on, and especially in this early electromechanical era, 1934, they're just starting to experiment with what they can do with the games to really attract players and keep them coming back and putting in more money. And I think this is a cool gimmick, I gotta say. And of course, they repeated it later on, just in a slightly different form and a different manufacturer. But obviously it has legs, and there's something about that animation of the ball actually physically kicking that is very satisfying. Alright, well that's all for tonight. Thank you very much for bearing with me. My name again is Nick Baldridge. You can reach me at foramusementonlypodcast@gmail.com, or you can call me on the Bingos line at 724-BINGOS1, 724-246-4671. You can listen to us on iTunes, Stitcher, Pocket Cast, via RSS, on Facebook, on Twitter at Bingo Podcast. You can follow me on Instagram, also at Bingo Podcast, or you can listen to me on my website, which is foramusementonly.libsyn.com. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll talk to you next time.